Here's a classic style banjo piece from the early 1880s called Mississippi Breakdowns. Well, greetings. We are the Titanic String Band. Here, to my right and your left, the inimitable Mitch Nolin. The odd instrument he holds in his hands is a mandocello. And of course, here's the banjo. I'm Peter Labu. And as I said, we are the Titanic String Band. We're going to play some classic style banjo pieces for you here. And it probably requires just a little bit of explanation about what this is that we're doing and why on earth we're dressed like this. Let's take a look at a picture here of a 19th century fellow named Joel Walker Sweeney. Joel Walker Sweeney is kind of where the banjo as we know it begins in America. In the 1830s, he was a young fella. He worked as a wheelwright with his dad. They built wagon wheels, which made him uniquely qualified to begin to build this machine here, the banjo, the five-string banjo. Now, Sweeney grew up in Lynchburg, Virginia, and was raised right next door to a plantation. And as a young boy, he played with slave children and heard the sound of primitive African instruments that there were many different types. Essentially, they were very simple gourd instruments that had an animal hide tacked on and some kind of a dowel stick with usually horsehair or gut string stretched on them. And as a young musician, Sweeney was fascinated by this. And he's kind of where the banjo begins for us because he's the one who crafted it into what it looks like relatively today with this short little peg on the side. All this is arguable, of course, but we attribute a lot of this to Sweeney. He's the one who added the little short peg on the side and gave it its five-string configuration here. So my banjo has nylon strings on it, which which gives it a softer sound. I play it with bare fingers. And the music that Mitch and I play as the Titanic String Band is really kind of from the years of 1880 through the middle 1910s. So banjo really got its start earlier than that, in the 1830s, with Mr. Sweeney. And his unique way of playing the instrument, which blended his European violin style of education with this instrument, made him an instant hit in Virginia. And his early concerts in Richmond were wildly received, and he really went viral with the banjo really early and performed in blackface, wanting to imitate the African slaves he'd seen play the thing. So he generated an enormous following, and pretty soon he had all kinds of people playing this instrument, usually in blackface. We'll take a look at a picture here. This is the Ethiopian Serenaders, and this is a minstrel troupe, and you see a bunch of what are obviously white people who have blacked up faces, burnt cork, arranged in a line. You'll see a banjo and bones and a tambourine. So minstrel shows were the next step away from Sweeney, where the music began to get more formalized. It was part of a bigger musical entertainment called a minstrel show, and this was filled with skits and dancers and songs and stories, but all rendered by white men in blackface. So throughout the late 1830s, 40s, 50s, through the Civil War, up into the 70s, 80s, even until the turn of the 20th century, these minstrel shows were, they were enormously popular. And we'll look at another photograph now of a pair sitting, just like Mitch and I are sitting, a little more slack-jawed maybe than we are, if that's even imaginable. The fellow you see with the banjo, sitting there with his funny hat and his blacked up face, sits next to his friend who is in whiteface, and you'll see the banner over the photograph. It's a medicine show. So the banjo, through the 19th century, has very humble, rudimentary beginnings. The way it was played, which is not the way I'm doing it, I'm playing in what was called guitar style, where fingers are used to play the individual strings. The early players played with more of just a two-finger kind of thing that sounded. So the early years of the banjo were filled with this, what was called a stroke style. And by the 1860s, 70s, people are beginning to use guitar players' techniques on the instrument. And very slowly, it begins to evolve out of something that's played just in minstrel shows and in bar rooms and in medicine shows. And as people get better with the instrument and get more adventurous with it, we start to see people like, well, here's Mr. William Huntley. And he was pretty much the first white player who could play the banjo without blackface on. In other words, the crowds had come to accept that the banjo was becoming a musical instrument, and you could do all kinds of things with it. So Mr. Huntley would play in whiteface, his regular complexion, and he insisted in dressing in clothes like we are wearing today, these tail suits. So this was just another mark of credibility, and so Huntley really opened the gate for the kind of music that Mitch and I play. So there were African Americans playing the instrument, of course, and they were also playing in minstrel shows and entertaining just the way their white counterparts were. In fact, here's another picture of one of the best known of the African American players named Horace Weston. Horace Weston was born in Connecticut, a free black man, served in the Civil War in the Union Army, was wounded, and while he was recovering, learned to play the banjo. And he became one of the great players of the 19th century. And Mitch and I are going to render up one here, probably written by Mr. Weston, called Horace Weston's Celebrated Minor Jig. we're going to do a cakewalk for you. This was a wildly popular tune in the late 19th century called Eli Green's Cakewalk by Sadie Kaninsky, who made quite a career as a songwriter. This was a big early hit for her. Cakewalks were a two-step dance. It was like early break dance. It was improvisational, and the prize at the dance contests for the most outlandish and the best dance steps was a cake. So this is where our expression, "that takes the cake," comes from. So here's a cakewalk, Eli Green's. Now, banjo is America's instrument, but actually some of the best composers in the early days of the instrument were Englishmen. Yes, I know what you're thinking. Actually, I don't. But yeah, the English wrote and played some of the best banjo music that has ever been. And we're going to play a piece here called Tattoo by Emil Grimshaw. Emil Grimshaw was a composer, he was a teacher, he was a performer, dapper, good-looking guy. I have one of his early method books from the 1910s. And so here's a tune by Mr. Grimshaw called Tattoo. going to follow on our theme of Englishmen playing American music or American instruments. Our next piece is by the fabulous, the world-renowned, the record breaker, the sensation maker, probably then the hardest working man in show business, Joe Morley. Joe was, in my estimation, and my opinion, and probably in Mitch's too, he was the greatest of the banjo composers, English or American. And he had over 200 very popular published banjo pieces in the early 20th century, actually ranging right up into the 1930s. A former circus pugilist. He was a child busker with his dad. They would work the street fairs, and he started out playing tambourine and dancing around in his little outfit, and grew to be one of just the best of the banjo players. So we're going to do a tune by Joe that was so popular in its day that one critic at the time wrote, "Does anyone play anything but this song anymore?" So every music hall, every pub, every tavern rang out with this tune that we'll call Joe Morley's Cakewalk.
Here we go, just roll.
Okay. We are going to play you one of the great ones from our hero, Joe Morley, the English banjo composer, and it's called Freckles. We're going to do one of the tunes we really enjoy, and, well, frankly, that's pretty much the only kind of tune we do, ones that we enjoy. And this is one by the English banjo composer Emil Grimshaw, and it is called Banjo Vamp.